It was on the 12th day of October, blustery, brass-leafed and damp with the sort of rain that insinuates itself into one's trouser cuffs and moral fibre, that Lord Peter Wimsey found himself at Bracondale Chase, the ancestral seat of the late Sir Jocelyn Quain, baronet, art historian, and amateur clairvoyant. It was not a social visit, which perhaps explained why Lord Peter wore tweed rather than his more flamboyant chalk-striped flannels, and carried not a book of Petrarchan's sonnets, but a pocket magnifying lens and a small disagreeable notebook which had lately contained some trenchant observations about the timing of milk deliveries in Bayswater. "I say, Parker," he murmured, stepping delicately over a blotch on the Aubusson rug that bore a suspicious resemblance to either claret or arterial blood. "If one must perish violently in one's own drawing-room, one might at least have the decency to avoid the Persian silk." He tapped the smudge with the end of his silver-knobbed cane and raised a brow at the man hunched by the hearth. Inspector Charles Parker, who had long since stopped being annoyed by Wimsey's epigrams, and had instead taken to regarding them as a form of weather, inevitable and sometimes useful, merely grunted and rose stiffly. "Sir Jocelyn Quain, aged 64, Parker intoned, as if dictating to a constable. "Shot in the left temple, revolver found in his own hand, but with no powder burns. Maid claims to have discovered him shortly before tea. No sign of forced entry, and all the windows locked, except the library casement, which was jammed open but too narrow to admit anything larger than a Pekingese." "A tragic accident?" asked Wimsey lightly, surveying the room with a languid gaze. "Or a dramatic exit after discovering the footman had chipped the Wedgwood urn?" "It looks like suicide," Parker said, though his voice carried the tone of a man unconvinced by his own theory. "But the maid says he was in excellent spirits at luncheon. Played Chopin all morning and asked for pheasant at dinner." Wimsey gave a short laugh. "That certainly rules out melancholia. No man planning to shuffle off the mortal coil voluntarily orders pheasant. It is far too rich." He knelt by the claret-coloured stain, drawing from his pocket a pair of pince-nez and a monogrammed handkerchief. "Observe," he said, delicately blotting the edge of the rug. "It's not wine, no bouquet, and the colour's too bright, but nor is it quite blood. There's something theatrical about it, like stage gore. Perhaps Sir Jocelyn had a penchant for dramatics?" "He did dabble in séances and spiritualism," said Parker grimly. "Hosted a medium here last month. Claimed to speak regularly with someone called Theodoric, an 11th century monk with a grudge against modern architecture." "I've often said there's nothing more tiresome than an undead Cistercian," replied Wimsey cheerfully. "But let's set aside the post-mortem gossip for a moment. Who exactly was in the house at the time?" Parker consulted his notes. "Miss Quain, the daughter, Philippa. Unmarried, Cambridge education, runs some sort of literary journal. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dunch. The maid, Edna Bly, who found the body. The butler, one Jasper Lane, formerly of the diplomatic service, or so he says. And Dr. Talbot, a guest, family physician and amateur botanist." "A ripe harvest," Wimsey said, rising. "I dare say one of them will prove to have seen absolutely nothing of consequence at precisely the right time. And yet," he added, almost to himself, "I wonder what precisely happened to the red salver." "The what?" "The red salver. There's a faint square of dust on the sideboard where it ought to have been, but no sign of it now. Strange, don't you think?" Parker looked unimpressed. "Stranger things have gone missing. Indeed. Virginity, good taste, and one of my best cufflinks. But the absence of a salver in a room where a man has apparently shot himself may yet prove salverific." Parker sighed. "Do you intend to investigate, or just make puns until someone else does the work?" "Oh, investigate, certainly," said Wimsey, brushing a smudge of soot from his lapel. "But I warn you, Charles, I have a weakness for servants with implausible alibis. You'll find me interviewing the help." He turned to the door, then paused. "By the by, Charles, don't let anyone tamper with that stain. I've a feeling it may not belong to Sir Jocelyn at all." Whimsy crossed the threshold into the east wing corridor with the air of a man expecting tea and scandal in equal measure. The house had settled into that muffled quiet peculiar to English country homes after a death, respectful but not mournful, as though the old stones and panelled walls had seen this sort of thing before and were prepared to observe the formalities with a dignified shrug. A grandfather clock ticked with solemn gravity somewhere beyond the staircase, and from the far end of the hallway came the faint metallic clatter of crockery, life continuing with the indifference of habit. Mrs. Dunch, the housekeeper, appeared in a crisply starched black dress that gave her the look of a memorial in motion. She had the pallor and dignity of an underpaid Roman senator, and greeted Lord Peter with a bob that was more acknowledgment than deference. "I trust, Mrs. Dunch," Whimsy began, "that you have not rearranged the corpse. It would be most inconvenient if Sir Jocelyn had been tidied up prematurely. There is something very telling about the natural splay of a dead man's limbs, I always find." "Dr. Talbot saw to him, my lord," she said, unmoved. "Covered the body, but left it as it was otherwise. I thought it best not to interfere." "Excellent," Whimsy replied, "respectfully negligent. That's what I like in a housekeeper. Now, if you'd be so kind, I'd like a word with Miss Bly." The maid was produced after a short delay, ushered in with the reluctant grace of a minor witness at the Salem trials. Edna Bly was perhaps 21, sharp-chinned and hollow-eyed, with a complexion that had the raw look of someone who had wept recently but with little satisfaction. Her uniform was neat, though her cuffs bore faint traces of flour, perhaps from earlier domestic engagements, or perhaps she had attempted to soothe herself by dusting the pantry shelves. She curtsied, barely. "Miss Bly," Whimsy said gently, "this is not an inquisition, merely an inquiry. Think of me as a particularly nosy house guest with aristocratic leanings and an overdeveloped sense of curiosity." Edna looked down at her shoes, which were sensible and immaculately polished. "I found him just after 3, sir. I'd gone to bring in the tea things. Sir Jocelyn always had his tea in the drawing-room if he was working at home." "And was he working today?" "He was in the library since breakfast. Came out for luncheon, then went back. Miss Philippa went riding after lunch. Said she'd be out till 5. I saw him last around 2 when I cleared the tray." Whimsy tilted his head slightly. "And at 3? "I knocked. There was no answer, so I went in. He was slumped in the chair by the fire. The pistol was in his hand. Blood on the carpet. I dropped the tray." "You dropped the tray," Whimsy repeated mildly. "And what happened to the salver?" She blinked. "The red one." It slid under the sideboard, I think." "No doubt pursued by some vengeful gravy boat," Whimsy murmured. "And yet it is no longer there." Edna looked confused. I'm sure it was. Perhaps it grew legs. These old country houses do encourage eccentric behavior in the household silver. One must be constantly vigilant." He paused, watching her closely. "You saw no one else on your way to the room? Heard nothing?" "No, sir. Everything was quiet." "Indeed. Too quiet, as the novelist says just before someone is brained with a candlestick. Thank you, Miss Bly. You may go." She turned and left with evident relief. Whimsy waited until the door closed behind her before pacing slowly across the corridor and turning to Parker, who had materialized from the parlor with a notepad and a look of gloomy resolution. "She's hiding something," Parker muttered. "Undoubtedly," said Whimsy. "Whether it's the truth or a fondness for undercooked scones remains to be seen. But she's nervous, not at discovering the body. That one expects. No, she was nervous when I mentioned the tray. A girl that frightened of a piece of tableware is either badly traumatized or has something to hide beneath it." "You think she moved the body?" But she might have moved something else. That salver, for instance." They turned into the library together. The fire was out now, reduced to an unromantic grayness. The heavy armchair stood precisely where it had been described, and the faint outline of Sir Jocelyn's head remained against the tapestry cushion, a dark smudge, half shadow, half memory. The pistol lay on the bureau, tagged and already examined by the constables. Wimsey looked it over and made a low sound in his throat. Webley and Scott. Fairly clean. But look, only one shot fired, yes. But no powder burns on the sleeve or temple. Suicide's a little less theatrical than this. Parker nodded. Then the killer wiped the prints and planted the gun. Possibly. Or the killer was cleverer still and left the prints untouched, knowing it would suggest suicide. But then, why the missing salver? Parker frowned. Maybe it had something incriminating on it. Or under it, Wimsey added softly. He stooped and peered beneath the low sideboard. Nothing here now, but someone cared enough to remove it. Either Edna lied about where it went, or someone came in after her and tidied. That doesn't make sense, Parker said. Everyone in the house says they didn't enter until after the police arrived. Which is why it must be true, Wimsey said airily. Lies are too clever by half. If you ever find a group of servants and family members all saying the same thing, it usually means either there's been collusion, or they're genuinely too unimaginative to concoct a better lie. He straightened and paced the perimeter of the room. The windows were tall, mullioned, and locked from within. The fireplace was wide, unused since morning, the grate swept. Books lined the shelves in neat formations, a few volumes out on the writing desk, Quain's own monograph on late Gothic architecture, and a slim, morbid volume, The Witch Cult in Western Europe. Of course, Wimsey murmured. One cannot commune with Theodoric the Obscure without recourse to a little scholarly context. He plucked the book from the desk and flipped it open. A folded scrap of paper fluttered from the pages, crisp, narrow, and scribbled in a fine copperplate hand. He read it in silence, then handed it to Parker. I will not be silenced by threats. The truth is not buried beneath bricks or blood. I shall speak it even if it damns me. Unsigned, undated, but tucked deliberately into a treatise on witchcraft. Now that, said Wimsey, is either blackmail, melodrama, or a suicide note with delusions of grandeur. The question is, who wrote it and to whom? Parker's brow furrowed. It could be Sir Jocelyn's. Not his hand, said Wimsey. Too tidy. Besides, Sir Jocelyn had no intention of being silenced. He had pheasant on order. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Wimsey said lightly, I believe it is time we had a chat with Miss Philippa Quain. A woman who reads Tennyson, rides before tea, and leaves her father dead behind her always deserves a moment's attention. And with that, he turned on his heel and walked from the room, humming a few bars from Götterdämmerung under his breath. The clock in the hall struck 4. Somewhere far above them, a door creaked. Miss Philippa Quain was ensconced in the morning room when Wimsey found her, a pale figure surrounded by well-thumbed volumes of poetry and a scattering of unopened letters. The room itself was an exercise in tasteful restraint. Muted greens and soft golds, floral chintz curtains half drawn to exclude the autumnal drizzle. And yet there was a certain restless energy to the girl's posture, as if the very walls were pressing in with the weight of secrets unspoken. She looked up with an expression that mingled curiosity and calculated reserve. Lord Peter, she said, inclining her head with the faintest trace of a smile that did not reach her eyes. You've come to join the morbid party, I see. Only as a reluctant guest, he replied, settling into the chair opposite her with his customary air of genteel irreverence. Death has a rather annoying habit of interrupting one's afternoon. Wouldn't you agree? I gather you were out riding at the time of your father's departure. Until 5, she confirmed crisply. My alibi is quite straightforward. Ask anyone at the stables. Ah, but the devil is never in the obvious, Wimsey murmured. Might I inquire if your ride was solitary? I prefer it so, she said with a flicker of impatience. The villagers gossip enough without adding a lady's company to their tales. Gossip, Whimsy repeated, that formidable weapon wielded by those who have nothing else to brandish. Tell me, Miss Quayne, was your relationship with your father as harmonious as the family portraits suggest? Her eyes narrowed. We were of different worlds. He was devoted to his antiquities and arcane pursuits, I to literature and the modern mind. But there was affection, if you must have it. Of course, he said, not unkindly. And yet affection is often a mask for more tangled emotions. Jealousy, resentment, the quiet battle for approval. Did your father have any recent quarrels? Business disputes? Old debts? She shook her head. Number, if anything, he seemed preoccupied with something, but he never confided. Curious, Whimsy said softly. One might expect the Baronet of Bracondale Chase to be a man of many confidences, especially if he dabbled in seances and secret societies. She gave a faint, mirthless laugh. He did have a penchant for the occult, thought it connected him to something greater, some hidden truth. It made us both the subject of local amusement, though I suppose now it might seem less ridiculous. Less ridiculous, perhaps, but no less relevant. Tell me, did you notice anyone acting peculiarly in the days leading up to your father's death? Any visitors of note? Only Dr. Talbot, she said, her gaze flickering. He was a family friend, though more a botanist than a physician. He was here frequently, especially lately. Whimsy nodded, making a note. I shall have to speak with this doctor, Talbot. And what of the servants? Have they all been forthcoming? She hesitated. Edna has been unsettled, not herself since the incident. Whimsy smiled thinly. That's often the case with the help. They tend to have the best view of the house's undercurrents, but the poorest tools to express them. Tell me, Miss Quayne, do you think Edna had any reason to dislike your father? The girl's eyes flashed. Number, she was loyal. Perhaps too much so. Whimsy tapped his chin thoughtfully. Sometimes loyalty can be a burden heavier than a sword. They fell into silence, interrupted only by the soft patter of rain against the window panes. Then, with a sudden shift, Philippa's expression hardened. Lord Peter, she said, there is something else. Something I've not told the police. Whimsy leaned forward, a faint glint in his eye. Do continue. The night before Father died, I overheard a heated argument between him and Jasper Lane, the butler. Parker, who had just entered quietly behind Whimsy, raised an eyebrow. An argument? Over what? I do not know precisely, Philippa said, but words like fraud and exposure were spoken. I was in the corridor, but I did not intervene. Whimsy exchanged a look with Parker. That will require further investigation. Thank you, Miss Quayne. As Whimsy and Parker left the room, the weight of unspoken truths seemed to press heavier on the house. In the servants' quarters, the atmosphere was markedly different. Jasper Lane awaited them with a calm that bordered on insolence. Tall, impeccably dressed, and possessing the kind of steely gaze that suggested experience in both diplomacy and subterfuge, the butler was an imposing figure. Lord Peter, Inspector, he said, inclining his head, I trust you have found the house in good order. Not quite, Mr. Lane, Whimsy replied. There are a few loose threads that need tightening. For instance, your quarrel with Sir Jocelyn. Lane's expression did not waver. I fail to see the relevance. Sir Jocelyn and I have had our differences, but nothing that would warrant murder. Differences, Whimsy mused, can be the seedbeds of greater strife. Pray, enlighten us. Lane's jaw tightened. I discovered irregularities in the estate's accounts. Funds missing, investments unaccounted for. I confronted Sir Jocelyn, and he was less than pleased, but the matter was to be handled discreetly. Quite right, said Whimsy. Discretion often being the first casualty in cases like this. And yet you say you have no motive. I serve this house, Lane said stiffly. My duty is loyalty, not avarice. Of course. And yet, Whimsy said, we are all fallible, Mr. Lane. The butler's eyes narrowed. I suppose so. With that, Whimsy excused himself and motioned to Parker to follow. A man with secrets does not make a good butler, Charles. No, Parker agreed, but a good butler makes a better suspect. The conversation turned to Dr. Talbot, who was found in the garden inspecting a collection of exotic plants with a peculiar intensity. The doctor greeted them cordially, but with an edge of impatience. Ah, Lord Peter, Inspector, to what do I owe the pleasure? We have questions, Whimsy said gently, about Sir Jocelyn's health and perhaps about his mental state. Talbot smiled thinly. Sir Jocelyn was in excellent health, barring a touch of rheumatism. His mind was sharp, though prone to certain obsessions. Obsessions such as... His interest in the occult was more than a pastime. He believed he was on the verge of uncovering something extraordinary, something that would redefine history. Whimsy raised a brow. And this something, do you think it was worth killing for? The doctor shrugged. Obsessions can drive men to irrational acts, but I doubt Sir Jocelyn's death was by his own hand. Nor do I, Whimsy agreed. Returning to the house, Whimsy found himself replaying the fragments of information, the missing salver, the overheard quarrel, the cryptic note in the book. Each was a thread, tangled and knotted, but none yet unraveled. And yet, beneath the veneer of civility and scholarship, there was a sharpness to the atmosphere, a tension that spoke of secrets better left buried. As dusk fell, the house seemed to hold its breath, the shadows lengthening with a slow inevitability. Whimsy lit a cigarette and mused aloud. One does wonder why the salver mattered enough to be concealed. Parker shrugged. Perhaps it bore a message or concealed a clue. Or was a stage prop in a drama we have only just begun to witness. The night promised revelations, but only to those patient enough to discern the delicate dance of motives and alibis, where every servant's glance, every half-spoken phrase could be the key to unlocking the truth hidden beneath the claret stain on the carpet. Whimsy's thoughts lingered on the missing salver long after the household had settled into uneasy quiet. The gleaming silver piece was no mere serving tray. It was an emblem of the house's old-fashioned elegance, carefully polished and placed for effect, and above all, something that could conceal or reveal secrets. That it had vanished from under the very eyes of the servants suggested more than absent-minded tidiness. It pointed to deliberate concealment. The following morning dawned with a damp chill peculiar to early November, mist clinging to the rolling hills like a veil over a half-forgotten mystery. Whimsy took a leisurely walk through the village, his keen eyes noting the nervous glances cast toward Brackendale Chase. The villagers' polite reticence was a familiar dance, a performance refined by generations in the presence of gentry and scandal alike. Yet, beneath their cautious smiles, there was a palpable tension, a communal hush over the sudden rupture of normalcy. Whimsy stopped by the village shop, where the proprietor, a stout woman named Mrs. Fallow, regarded him with a mixture of deference and apprehension. "Morning, my lord. Heard the news, of course." "Indeed," Whimsy said, smiling thinly. "One finds death has a peculiar way of enlivening a community. I was wondering if you might indulge me with any local curiosities or gossip concerning Sir Jocelyn or his household." Mrs. Fallow wrung her hands. "Well, there's been talk about the late master's obsession with that strange book on witchcraft. Some say it unsettled the servants, made the house tense." "Tense how?" Whimsy asked, his curiosity piqued. "Whispers of strange noises at night, flickering candles, shadows moving where they oughtn't. The butler, Mr. Lane, has been said to hold odd conversations with the doctor. Some say there's more to the story than meets the eye." "Ah, the village telephone game," Whimsy said, "always embellishing in the service of suspense." "Perhaps, my lord," she conceded, "but it does make a body wonder if there's truth beneath the tales." Whimsy thanked her and continued his stroll, turning over the notion of shadows and whispers. The Gothic flavor of the house's reputation had been merely atmospheric until now, but there was a kernel of something more tangible, a faint scent of fear or guilt. The mention of Mr. Lane and Dr. Talbot talking in hushed tones added a new piece to the puzzle, suggesting alliances or conspiracies hidden beneath the surface of polite society. Back at Brackendale Chase, Whimsy and Parker reconvened in the library, a room now suffused with the soft afternoon light filtering through the stained glass. Whimsy spread the scattered documents and notes across the table, arranging the fragments of testimony like pieces in a mosaic. Let us revisit the timeline, Charles. According to Edna, she cleared the luncheon tray around 2 o'clock, then returned at 3 to bring the tea. The body was discovered at that hour. Parker nodded. Miss Philippa confirms she was out riding until 5. No one else claims to have entered the library in that window. Except for Mr. Lane, during the argument with Sir Jocelyn the previous evening, Whimsy added thoughtfully. The question is, what of the hours between 2 and 3? Can anyone place the butler or the doctor at the library then? We have their statements, but nothing concrete, Parker replied. Both claim to have been elsewhere. Lane overseeing the pantry, Talbot in the garden. Alibis that may be rehearsed? Whimsy mused. Tell me, Charles, what of the soundproofing? The library door is reputed to be unusually thick, is it not? Indeed. Sir Jocelyn had it reinforced after a burglary a few years ago. Then an argument, or a struggle, might have gone unheard beyond that room. The servants would have had no cause to suspect anything amiss until Edna found the body. Whimsy's eyes sparkled with the thrill of piecing together the unseen. And yet, if there was no noise, how did the killer make their escape unnoticed? The windows were locked. The only other entrance is the main corridor, guarded by the butler's domain. Which brings us back to Mr. Lane, Parker said grimly. He knew the house better than anyone. Whimsy tapped the cryptic note they had found tucked in the witchcraft tome. This message, penned in careful script, speaks of silencing and hidden truths. It is a deliberate provocation, intended to unsettle. Who would want to unsettle Sir Jocelyn enough to kill him? Parker wondered aloud. Someone intimately familiar with his fears and secrets. Possibly someone who shared his fascination with the occult, or someone who despised it. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp knock of the front door. Parker opened it to admit Doctor Talbot, who looked more disheveled than before, his normally neat appearance slightly rumpled as if he had spent a restless night. Lord Peter, Inspector, Talbot said, his tone edged with urgency. There is something you must see. Whimsy rose, his curiosity piqued. By all means, Doctor. Lead the way. Talbot led them to the conservatory, where a collection of rare plants thrived in the humid glass enclosure. Among the lush greenery, Talbot pointed to a small cluster of withered leaves. These are belladonna, deadly nightshade. I noticed them damaged, clipped, as if someone had tampered with them. Poisonous, Whimsy said, bending to inspect the leaves. And yet, no sign of poisoning in Sir Jocelyn's autopsy report. No, but it is possible the plant was used in some other way. I fear there was more to his death than a simple bullet. Whimsy straightened, eyes narrowing. You think the bullet was a distraction, a theatrical flourish to mask a more subtle crime? Exactly. Sir Jocelyn was a man of science and superstition. It would not be beyond him or his enemies to stage something dramatic. Then we must consider the possibility of a staged scene, Whimsy said. The missing salver, the note, the reinforced door, all parts of a carefully constructed puzzle. Do you suspect the butler? Parker asked quietly. I suspect many things, but no one yet. This house holds its secrets close. Whimsy's gaze lingered on the darkening sky beyond the glass, the distant roll of thunder a reminder that the storm was yet to break. He sensed the subtle shift in the air, the gathering of shadows and half-truth that would soon be illuminated by relentless questioning and precise logic. "The game is afoot, Charles," Whimsy said with a wry smile. "And I do so enjoy a game where the pieces move of their own volition, unaware they are dancing to my tune." Parker smiled despite the gravity of the situation. "Then let us begin, my lord." As the day waned, Lord Peter Whimsy prepared to delve deeper into the lives tangled around Sir Jocelyn's death, where every glance, every whispered word, and every unnoticed detail would bring them closer to the uncomfortable truth concealed beneath Brackendale Chase's genteel veneer. The evening air had settled into a thick, damp quiet when Whimsy returned to the library, the faint aroma of burning coal mingling with the sharp tang of old leather and dust. The windows, shut tight against the creeping chill, filtered the dying light into somber hues. Parker was already seated by the hearth, his notebook open and brow furrowed in thoughtful concentration. "Any progress with the salver?" Parker asked as Whimsy crossed the room. "None," Whimsy replied, casting a glance around the carefully arranged shelves. "Yet its absence gnaws at me like a stubborn cough. Something so small, so seemingly trivial, yet it holds a key piece of the puzzle. I suspect it was removed not merely to conceal, but to communicate." "Communicate," Parker echoed. "Indeed. Consider the context. Sir Jocelyn, obsessed with arcane knowledge and secret societies, leaves a cryptic note tucked within a volume on witchcraft, and the salver vanishes. It suggests a message aimed at someone within these very walls." Parker frowned, tapping his pen thoughtfully, "which narrows the suspects considerably." Whimsy nodded. "But before we delve further into theory, we must reconstruct the timeline with absolute precision. The devil, as ever, resides in the details." He pulled from his pocket a small notebook, dog-eared at the edges, and began to read through the statements collected that day. "Edna, the maid, claims to have cleared the luncheon tray at 2 o'clock and brought the tea at 3. Philippa was out riding until 5, and Dr. Talbot insists he was in the garden tending to his plants during the critical hour. Mr. Lane, the butler, maintains he was overseeing the pantry and cellar at the time," Parker added. "Quite so. But the question remains, who was in the library, and when precisely did the shooting occur?" Whimsy's mind wandered back to the testimony of Edna, a girl whose demeanor struck him as a curious mixture of fear and something else, perhaps guilt or simply the weight of unwelcome knowledge. "Have we spoken again with Edna?" Whimsy asked. "Not since this morning," Parker said. "She was visibly shaken then." "Then we must. The servants often know far more than they admit, bound by their precarious positions between loyalty and self-preservation." They found Edna in the scullery, a narrow, dimly lit room that seemed to press in on her like a confessional. Her hands trembled slightly as she dried a cup with a threadbare towel. "Edna," Whimsy began gently, "may I ask you a few questions?" The girl nodded, eyes downcast. "Yes, my lord." "Tell me, at what exact time did you find Sir Jocelyn?" She swallowed hard. "Just after I brought the tea, about 3 o'clock. I was passing the library on my way back to the kitchen when I heard a noise, a sort of thud. When I opened the door, I saw him lying on the floor." "Did you see anyone else nearby?" "No, my lord. The door was shut when I came in." "And the window?" "Closed, always closed during the afternoon." "Good. Now tell me, did you notice anything unusual that day? Any visitors, strange conversations, or odd behavior?" Edna hesitated. "I heard voices the night before, in the corridor outside the library. Mr. Lane and Sir Jocelyn arguing." "And the nature of their quarrel?" "I don't rightly know, my lord. But Mr. Lane sounded angry, said something about secrets and betrayal." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Parker. "Secrets and betrayal," he mused aloud. "A potent combination." After a brief pause, Edna added, "And I saw Miss Philippa take a small package from the library earlier that day. She said it was something Father wanted hidden. Do you know where she took it? Wimsey asked. No, my lord. She left the house soon after. Very well, Edna. You've been most helpful. As they left, Wimsey's mind raced. The package, the argument, the missing salver, threads weaving a tapestry of deception and concealed motives. Back in the library, Wimsey turned to Parker. We must question Miss Philippa anew and ascertain the nature of that package. Moreover, the interactions between Mr. Lane and Sir Jocelyn merit closer scrutiny. The evening grew deeper, the house settling into a heavier silence. Yet beneath this calm, the gears of revelation were beginning to turn. The following morning, Wimsey invited Miss Philippa to join them in the drawing-room, where the fire burned low but bright, casting flickering shadows over the walls lined with ancestral portraits that seemed to watch with inscrutable eyes. Miss Quain, Wimsey began with measured politeness, I understand you took a package from the library on the day of your father's death. She stiffened, but did not deny it. It was a set of documents, letters mostly. My father asked me to secure them. And where did you take these documents? To the local vicarage, she said quietly. I feared they might be dangerous if left here. Wimsey's interest sharpened. Dangerous how? There were references to financial dealings, some investments my father made that were irregular, possibly fraudulent. Fascinating, Wimsey murmured. Did these letters mention anyone in particular? Only in passing, various acquaintances and creditors. Thank you, Miss Quain. Your discretion is appreciated. Wimsey rose, turning to Parker. It seems our deceased was not merely dabbling in the occult, but embroiled in matters more worldly and perhaps far more perilous. They made their way to the vicarage, a modest stone building cloaked in ivy and the weight of quiet devotion. The Reverend Mr. Cavendish greeted them with a cautious smile and led them to a small study where the package lay unopened on the desk. Wimsey carefully unfolded the letters, scanning the elegant but urgent handwriting. Here, Charles, is evidence of debts incurred to unsavory characters, mentions of threats and warnings. Sir Jocelyn's financial entanglements were more precarious than we supposed. And that may provide a motive for murder, Parker remarked. Indeed, but motive alone is seldom sufficient without opportunity and means. As they left the vicarage, Wimsey's gaze fell upon the church bell tower, its ancient bells silent for the moment but resonant in their symbolic weight. Time, as always, was the key. The moments before and after Sir Jocelyn's death, the precise movements of each player in this grim drama. Back at Brackendale Chase, Wimsey requested a further audience with Mr. Lane. The butler appeared with an expression as impenetrable as ever, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Mr. Lane, Wimsey began, I must ask you about the quarrel you had with Sir Jocelyn. Financial irregularities are now known to have troubled the estate. Lane's jaw tightened. I was duty-bound to bring discrepancies to Sir Jocelyn's attention. He did not welcome my concerns. Was there anyone else who stood to gain from his death? Lane hesitated. There are always those who benefit from the fall of a man, but I do not know who. Did you notice anything out of place in the days leading to the tragedy? Visitors, missing items, unusual behavior? Lane's eyes flicked to the door before returning to Wimsey. The salver was moved the night before. I do not know by whom. Wimsey arched an eyebrow. The missing salver, now that is a curious detail. Lane said nothing further, but the tightening of his fists spoke volumes. As evening approached, Wimsey retired to his room to collate the day's findings. The house seemed to close around him, walls bearing silent witness to whispered conversations, unspoken resentments, and the fragile facades that masked darker truths. He lit a cigarette and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was far from clear. A man obsessed with forbidden knowledge, entangled in financial peril. A butler with knowledge of secrets and grudges, a daughter guarding family shadows, a maid trembling on the edge of confession. Each held a piece of the puzzle, and somewhere in the interplay of these fragments lay the answer. Wimsey smiled thinly, his thoughts returning to the absent salver. Small, insignificant, yet pivotal, the kind of clue that a lesser mind might dismiss, but which, in truth, was the linchpin of the entire mystery. Tomorrow he would probe deeper, ask the questions no one dared voice aloud. For in the silent spaces between words, the truth waited, patient and inexorable. The dawn mist clung stubbornly to the grounds of Brackendale Chase, lending a spectral pallor to the ancient oaks that lined the gravel drive. Lord Peter Wimsey emerged from his chambers, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that contrasted sharply with the somber atmosphere. The previous evening's revelations had set the day's course. Each step now must be measured with surgical precision. He found Parker already awaiting him in the breakfast room, where the morning light spilled weakly over a table cluttered with notes and half-drunk cups of tea. "Good morning, Charles. Restless night?" "Only insofar as it mirrored your own, I'm sure," Parker replied, stirring his tea absently. "The servants are becoming increasingly uneasy, and I fear they are closing ranks." Wimsey nodded, lighting a cigarette with deliberate grace. "Understandable. Fear breeds silence, and silence protects secrets. But fear can also unearth truths, if one knows where to prod." He cast a glance towards the door just as Edna entered, her expression guarded but less timorous than before. "Edna," Wimsey began gently, "may I trouble you for a moment before you attend your duties?" She nodded, taking a hesitant step forward. "I have a few further questions regarding the day of Sir Jocelyn's death," Wimsey said, fixing her with his keen gaze. "You mentioned hearing a noise. Could you be more specific? Was it a single sound or a sequence?" Edna hesitated, fidgeting with her apron. "It was like a heavy thump, my lord, followed by a sort of scraping, maybe a chair being dragged." "Interesting," Wimsey murmured. "And did the noise come from within the library or outside it?" "From inside, I think. I was just passing when the door was slightly ajar. That's when I peeped in and saw Sir Jocelyn." "Did you notice anything else? Any sign of struggle?" Her eyes flickered. There was a broken quill on the floor and some papers scattered near his hand. Wimsey's mind ticked over the detail. A thump, scraping, broken quill, scattered papers. Not an impulsive murder, but a moment of chaos. "Thank you, Edna. That will be all for now." As she left, Wimsey turned to Parker. "We must examine that library more closely. The scene may yield clues overlooked in the initial turmoil." In the quiet of the library, Wimsey moved with the grace of a man attuned to the hidden language of rooms and objects. The heavy oak desk bore scratches and indentations, and beneath it lay a scattering of fine parchment and an overturned inkpot, its contents seeping slowly into the carpet. "Note the arrangement here, Charles," Wimsey said, pointing to the papers. "They are not merely dropped, but deliberately scattered, as if to obscure something beneath." Parker crouched, carefully lifting a folded sheet. It appears to be part of a ledger, names and figures with some entries crossed out. Wimsey's eyes narrowed. Financial discrepancies, perhaps, or payments concealed in haste. His gaze drifted to the fireplace, where a smudged handprint marred the polished stone. A struggle, surely, and yet no sign of forced entry. The murderer was either known or had access. "Mr. Lane," Parker suggested. "Indeed," Wimsey agreed. "But let us not confine ourselves to conjecture." He moved to the window, testing the lock with a finger. Still secure. "The door?" "Locked from the inside," Parker confirmed. "Then the killer had to have been present before the door was shut, or possess a key." Wimsey paced slowly, piecing the puzzle anew. Later that morning, Whimsy arranged a discreet meeting with Dr. Talbot in the conservatory, where the faint aroma of belladonna still lingered among the verdant leaves. "Doctor," Whimsy began, "you mentioned yesterday that Sir Jocelyn's death might have been more than a mere shooting. Do you have any further thoughts?" Talbot adjusted his spectacles, his usually steady hands betraying slight tremors. "I examined the body carefully. The bullet wound was fatal, but there were signs of prior distress, bruising on the forearms, a slight contusion on the temple, suggestive of a struggle or perhaps a fall. Was there any indication of poisoning, as the damaged belladonna might imply? No toxins in his system, but the plant's presence cannot be ignored. It was clearly disturbed before the incident, possibly in an attempt to use it as a weapon or a warning." Whimsy's mind circled the implications. A weapon, a threat, a staged scene. Each fits the Gothic theatre Sir Jocelyn seemed fond of. "Yet the truth is often far less romantic," Talbot said quietly. "Indeed," Whimsy replied, a wry smile touching his lips, "and therein lies the challenge." After Talbot departed, Whimsy requested Parker to gather the household for another round of interviews, this time focusing on Mr. Lane and the kitchen staff. The butler's stoic reserve was a veneer likely to crack under the right pressure. Whimsy chose to begin with Miss Philippa, who had resumed a cool composure but carried an air of guarded apprehension. "Miss Quayne," Whimsy addressed her with his customary blend of politeness and mild reproach, "you have protected your father's secrets with admirable discretion. However, secrets, like shadows, lengthen as the day wanes. It is in your interest as much as ours that we uncover the truth." She lifted her chin. "I understand, Lord Peter, but I cannot say more without betraying my family." "Very well. But remember, Miss Quayne, betrayal often comes not from honesty, but from silence." Next, Whimsy summoned Mr. Lane to the drawing room. The butler entered with deliberate calm, bowing slightly but with eyes that betrayed a flicker of defiance. "Mr. Lane," Whimsy began, "your quarrel with Sir Jocelyn was no secret. Tell me, was it merely a matter of accounts or something more personal?" Lane's jaw tightened. "My duty was to uphold the estate's integrity. My concern was the reckless dissipation of funds, endangering all who depend upon it. Yet we have reason to believe there was also a disagreement about Sir Jocelyn's, shall we say, interests in the occult. Do you deny your disapproval?" Lane's face darkened. "I do not indulge in superstition." "Understandable. But Sir Jocelyn's beliefs may have bred enemies, or at least unease." Lane shifted uncomfortably. "I do not know who wished him harm. I was loyal to the end." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "Loyalty is admirable, but not exclusive. Others may feign it." The interviews progressed with meticulous care, each answer weaving a tighter net around the truth. As the afternoon waned, Whimsy reflected on the patterns emerging. Financial desperation intertwined with arcane obsession, secrets jealously guarded, yet subtly betrayed in slips of language and hesitation. His thoughts returned to the scattered papers, the broken quill, the missing salver, each detail a thread to be pulled, each alibi a fragile construct. That evening, as the household retired behind closed doors and the wind whispered through the eaves, Whimsy and Parker sat by the fire, reviewing their notes. "Charles," Whimsy said, "observe how the timeline hinges on seemingly insignificant intervals. The exact moment Edna passed the library, the gap between the luncheon and tea, the fleeting presence of the package." Parker nodded. "And how the servants' testimonies, while careful, reveal contradictions upon closer scrutiny." "Precisely. The killer counted on these small lapses, confident they would be overlooked." Whimsy's gaze drifted to the empty fireplace where the fire's glow faded. "But there is one element we have not yet fully explored. The psychological underpinnings. What drove a man like Sir Jocelyn to court danger so recklessly? And who among those around him was compelled to silence him?" The room seemed to close in, the shadows lengthening as the house settled into uneasy slumber. Tomorrow, Whimsy concluded, we begin to unmask the unseen player in this grim theatre. And with that, the game moved inexorably toward its next revelation, beneath the watchful eyes of ancestral portraits and the heavy, silent stones of Bracondale Chase. The morning light fell pale and diffident through the heavy curtains of the drawing-room as Lord Peter Whimsy settled into the high-backed armchair with an expression of thoughtful gravity. The investigations at Bracondale Chase had, to all appearances, reached a plateau of polite dead ends and evasive replies, but the unyielding atmosphere pressed upon him like the very walls of the ancient house, silent witnesses to the lurking mystery. Parker entered with the morning post and a tray of tea, placing them before his master with his usual discreet efficiency. "Several letters, my lord, mostly from solicitors and one from the local constabulary. Inspector Sugg, it appears, is growing impatient." "Impatience is the province of those who see the wood, but not the trees," Whimsy remarked, pouring himself a cup. "The truth, Charles, lies hidden in the details, the hurried overlook." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Miss Philippa Quain, who entered with a grace that belied the tension evident in her eyes. "Lord Peter, I hope you will forgive my intrusion so early, but there are matters which I believe require your urgent attention." Whimsy gestured towards an empty chair. "By all means, Miss Quain, your timely concerns are most welcome." She seated herself, smoothing her gloves nervously. "I have been reviewing some papers in my father's private study, among them a letter seemingly innocuous, but upon reflection, perhaps significant. It was addressed to Sir Jocelyn, but never delivered." Whimsy's interest piqued. "Indeed? Pray, what was its substance?" Philippa hesitated, then produced a folded sheet of cream paper, worn at the edges. "It is from an old acquaintance of my father's, a Mr. Samuel Blakely. The letter references a matter of utmost delicacy and warns Sir Jocelyn against certain associations he had recently undertaken." Whimsy took the letter with careful fingers, reading the precise, slightly archaic script. The content was veiled but unmistakably ominous, hinting at forces beyond mortal comprehension and a peril that threatens both reputation and life. "An intriguing piece of Gothic melodrama," Whimsy remarked dryly. "Yet often such theatrical warnings mask very earthly motives: jealousy, greed, revenge." "Mr. Blakely was considered eccentric even in his youth," Philippa added, "but the letter's tone suggests genuine concern." "Do we know where this Mr. Blakely may be found?" Whimsy inquired. "Unfortunately, no. He left the county some years ago, and attempts to trace him have proved fruitless." Whimsy folded the letter thoughtfully. "Even absent the sender, the letter may indicate someone close to Sir Jocelyn shared anxieties he chose to conceal, or perhaps the very secret that led to his demise." Their discussion was interrupted by Parker, who announced the arrival of Mr. Lane. The butler entered with his characteristic solemnity, eyes cast downward but attentive. "Mr. Lane," Whimsy addressed him directly, "there is a matter which requires your clarity. It concerns the timing of your movements on the afternoon of Sir Jocelyn's death." Lane's lips compressed, but he nodded. "I am aware of the importance, my lord." Whimsy continued, "You stated you were in the pantry between 3 and 4 o'clock preparing for tea service, yet several witnesses recall seeing you in the corridor near the library around 3:30. Could you reconcile this discrepancy?" Lane's face betrayed a flicker of unease before he composed himself. "I might have briefly left the pantry to retrieve a forgotten item. A butler's duties are seldom confined." "Of course. And yet, might you recall what this item was?" "A ledger, my lord. I'd been asked to verify some entries for Miss Philippa. Whimsy made a note, then added with a subtle smile, "Thank you, Mr. Lane. Your diligence is appreciated." As Lane withdrew, Whimsy turned to Parker. "The ledger again. The financial records seem to be a thread that, when tugged, unravels much. Parker nodded. Indeed, sir, there appears to have been significant tension over expenditures and debts, though the precise figures remain opaque. Wimsey stood, moving toward the window. And the broken quill. It suggests haste or struggle, but also the attempt to conceal something written, or perhaps erased. Have the papers been examined for fingerprints or alterations? Parker asked. The police reported only smudges and faded ink, Wimsey replied. But in my experience, the human mind is far more revealing than mere forensics. He turned to Philippa, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Miss Quayne, may I trouble you to recount once more your whereabouts during the critical hour? Philippa nodded steadily. After luncheon, I retired to the garden to clear my mind. I spent some time by the rose bushes, then walked the terrace. I saw no one else outside. Alone the entire time? Yes, until I returned indoors, where I heard raised voices but could not discern the speakers. Thank you. And the voices? Did they seem angry, fearful, or otherwise? Urgent, perhaps. Sir Jocelyn's voice was calm but firm. The other I could not identify. Wimsey steepled his fingers. Another layer of the mystery. Later that afternoon, Wimsey requested the presence of Edna once more, this time in the stillness of the library where the incident had occurred. Edna, Wimsey began gently, you mentioned hearing noises and seeing the door ajar. Might you describe the state of the room in more detail? She looked hesitant but resolved. The chair was overturned near the desk, and the curtains were slightly pulled aside as if disturbed by a sudden movement. And the clock on the mantelpiece? Edna glanced at the ornate timepiece, its hands frozen at precisely 3:27. It was not running, she admitted. I thought it had stopped the day before. Wimsey's eyebrows rose. An important observation. A stopped clock is a common theatrical device to fix the moment of death, or to mislead. He circled the room, inspecting the tapestry and the arrangement of books. Was the door normally left locked from the inside? No, my lord. Usually it was left unlocked during the day. Curious. And the window? Edna opened the heavy sash. It was latched firmly. Thank you, Edna. Your attention to detail is commendable. After Edna's departure, Wimsey turned to Parker. The stopped clock at 3:27 aligned suspiciously with the estimated time of death. Yet if the clock ceased beforehand, it may have been manipulated to create a false timeline, suggesting the murderer sought to fix the hour to misdirect. Precisely. Time, after all, is a most pliable weapon in a crime. As twilight deepened, Wimsey found himself alone in the drawing room, reviewing the scattered papers once more. The ledger revealed entries of large sums diverted to obscure accounts. The letter from Mr. Blakely hinted at a secret dangerous enough to warrant threats. The broken quill and overturned chair testified to a sudden disturbance. Yet what troubled Wimsey most was the subtle interplay of personalities, each with motives concealed beneath layers of loyalty, fear, and resentment. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Inspector Sugg, whose brusque demeanor was tempered only by the respect owed to Lord Peter's reputation. Lord Peter, he began, I understand you have been conducting your own inquiries. I must remind you, the constabulary prefers to work without interference. Wimsey inclined his head politely. Inspector, I share your desire for justice, though methods may differ. Might I suggest a joint examination of the ledger and the stopped clock? These minutiae appear to hold more weight than the initial inquiry presumed. Sugg grunted but acquiesced. Very well. But time is of the essence. Together they examined the evidence under the waning light, the silent house bearing witness to the convergence of logic and suspicion. As the inspector departed, Wimsey allowed himself a small smile. The game is afoot, Charles. The web tightens and the unseen hand begins to tremble. Parker nodded, and with it the truth draws nearer. Outside, the wind stirred the ancient branches, whispering secrets best left unspoken. But within the walls of Brackendale Chase, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared to cast the final light upon the darkness. The house was unnaturally still that evening, the sort of stillness that weighs heavily on the air and presses upon the mind with insidious insistence. Lord Peter Wimsey paced quietly in the dim glow of the library's oil lamp, the scattered papers before him now arranged with a fastidiousness that bespoke his racing thoughts. The ledger, the letter from Blakely, the frozen clock, the broken quill, each fragment a carefully wrought piece of a puzzle that still resisted complete assembly. There was a knock at the door. Wimsey looked up, a faint arch in his brow signaling an unspoken invitation. Parker entered, bearing a discreetly folded note. "My lord, this arrived just before dinner. It is unsigned." Wimsey unfolded the note with deliberate care. The handwriting was firm yet unfamiliar, neat with an old-fashioned flourish. "To Lord Peter Wimsey, your inquiries tread too close to truths some would rather bury. For the sake of peace and your own safety, desist at once. The maid had no alibi, but neither does she deserve the shadow that falls upon her name. Beware the serpent in the garden." Wimsey's eyes twinkled with ironic amusement, though there was a shadow beneath. "A serpent in the garden, Charles. The classical symbol for deceit, temptation, and betrayal. A literary flourish, perhaps, but one pregnant with meaning." Parker's eyes narrowed. "Threats, my lord. This suggests someone fears exposure." "Indeed, and with the note so carefully worded, we may assume an intimate knowledge of the case and the players involved. Someone with a vested interest in the outcome." The question that now dominated Wimsey's mind was, who among the household had the motive, the opportunity, and the craft to send such a warning? The evening grew darker as the household settled into uneasy silence. Wimsey requested Parker to arrange for the servants to retire early, and he sent a message to Inspector Sugg, suggesting a discreet meeting in the morning to share recent developments. Left alone with his thoughts, Wimsey returned to the ledger. The entries hinted at large sums siphoned from the estate's funds, payments to unknown recipients that could only be described as suspicious. It was a complex web of financial misdirection which implicated more than one household member, but in what capacity? Suddenly, a detail caught Wimsey's eye. A series of transactions clustered around the same date as the arrival of Sir Jocelyn's enigmatic letter from Mr. Blakely. Could this coincidence be merely temporal, or was it the spark that ignited the chain of events culminating in murder? With a faint smile, Wimsey mused aloud, "The devil is in the details, Charles, and also, as it appears, in the timing." Retiring to his chambers, Wimsey resolved to revisit the scene of the crime at the earliest opportunity, to reassess with fresh eyes what had already been so carefully documented. The following morning dawned cold and grey, with a faint drizzle that made the garden path slick and the air sharp with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Wimsey arrived at the library promptly, where Parker awaited with a collection of notes and sketches. "Good morning, my lord," Parker greeted him. "Inspector Sugg is due shortly, and Miss Quayne has agreed to join us for a review of the day's schedule." "Excellent," Wimsey replied. "Precision is the ally of truth." Philippa arrived, looking pale but resolute. The inspector followed soon after, his manner brisk but less guarded than usual. Wimsey began by summarizing the prior evening's discoveries and the contents of the EOS threatening note. Sugg listened attentively, nodding occasionally. "Very well, Lord Peter," the inspector said. "Where shall we begin?" Wimsey indicated the ledger. "I propose we start here. This document, when read alongside the household movements, may illuminate contradictions and falsehoods." Together they pored over the ledger entries, marking dates and amounts. Wimsey pointed to several payments made to an account in London under the name of a Mr. Hugh Cartwright. "Have we a record of Mr. Cartwright's association with the household?" Whimsy inquired. Sugg consulted his notebook. Cartwright was a solicitor who handled some minor business for Sir Jocelyn, but is not known to have visited Bracondale Chase recently. Philippa looked surprised. "My father never mentioned him in recent years." "Yet large payments were made," Whimsy observed. "Curious. It suggests either extortion or blackmail. Someone had leverage." Whimsy then turned to the household's daily schedule. "Miss Quayne, could you assist in reconstructing your father's movements on the day in question?" Philippa nodded and outlined the sequence with calm precision. After breakfast, he spent several hours in his study, receiving various visitors. Lunch was at 1:30. The afternoon was largely spent reviewing correspondence and meeting with Mr. Lane, who brought documents from London. Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "And the timing of the arrival of this letter from Mr. Blakely?" Philippa hesitated. "It was delivered that morning by the postman, but remained unopened until after lunch." "An important fact," Whimsy said quietly. "One that may suggest Sir Jocelyn's death was sudden and unforeseen." Sugg interjected. "We had assumed the letter was received earlier, and its contents a possible motive." "Indeed," Whimsy replied. "Yet the ledger indicates financial pressures mounting concurrently, perhaps pointing to a motive rooted in money rather than arcane warnings." They turned to the household staff. Whimsy's inquiries grew more focused, drawing out small discrepancies. Lane's brief absence from the pantry, the stopped clock, the missing salver that had once been used to carry tea to Sir Jocelyn. The latter detail piqued the inspector's interest. "A missing salver, was it found?" "No," Whimsy confirmed. "Likely removed to conceal evidence or as part of a staged scene." Philippa looked distraught. "I had no idea such things were amiss." "Sometimes," Whimsy said softly, "it is the smallest details that betray the largest secrets." The afternoon waned as they continued, and Whimsy requested to revisit the garden terrace, where Philippa had spent the critical hour after lunch. Walking the damp path, Whimsy observed the disturbed earth near a rose bush and the faint impression of a footprint not entirely consistent with Philippa's slender shoe. A subtle indentation in the soil, the disturbance of a twig, all spoke to someone else's presence. "Miss Quayne," Whimsy remarked, "do you recall anyone approaching while you were outside?" Philippa shook her head. "No, I was alone, or so I believed. Yet the evidence suggests otherwise." Returning inside, Whimsy directed attention to the servants' quarters. Quietly, Parker and he examined the arrangement of keys, the servants' routines, and the mysterious night lock on the library door. "Here is the fulcrum," Whimsy said, gently tapping the door. "If the door was locked from within, how was the murderer able to leave without detection? And if left unlocked, who would have had access and the means to time the murder precisely?" Their speculation was interrupted by a soft knock and the arrival of Miss Selina Grant, the housekeeper, whose demeanor combined propriety with an unyielding sharpness. "Lord Peter," she began, "I have heard some troubling whispers among the staff. Certain servants speak of late-night meetings, hushed arguments, and strange behavior." Whimsy regarded her keenly. "You may have just provided a new avenue to explore, Miss Grant." The housekeeper nodded gravely and offered a name: Thomas Withers, the gardener, whose uncharacteristic absences and furtive glances had not escaped her notice. "Has he been questioned?" Whimsy asked. "No, my lord, but I believe he has something to hide." Without delay, Whimsy summoned Thomas Withers to the library. The man appeared nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he entered. "Mr. Withers," Whimsy began in his precise tone, "would you care to explain your whereabouts during the hours leading up to Sir Jocelyn's death?" Withers swallowed hard. "I was in the greenhouses, sir, tending to the orchids." "And did anyone see you there?" "No, sir. I was alone." Whimsy's gaze was unyielding. A solitary alibi is often the most precarious. Pressed further, Withers faltered, revealing a tangled history of debts, threats, and a secret liaison with one of the maids. Debt and desperation, Charles, Whimsy mused to Parker once Withers had departed. The common currency of crime. As dusk fell, the threads of the day's discoveries coalesced into a tapestry more intricate and troubling than before. The ledger's shadowy payments, the threatening letter, the missing salver, the stopped clock, and now the gardener's dubious story, all pointed to a conspiracy, born not merely of passion or greed, but of layered deception. Whimsy sat back, lighting a cigar with his customary air of detached amusement. The game tightens, Charles, and yet the final move is not yet made. The serpent in the garden writhes still, but soon it will be unmasked. The house creaked softly around him, the unseen eyes of Brackendale Chase watching, waiting for the truth to emerge from the shadows. The dawn broke weakly over Brackendale Chase, a pale wash of grey that barely stirred the chill in the air. Whimsy found himself once more in the library, the chamber still redolent of the faint tobacco smoke and the lingering scent of aged paper and leather-bound volumes. The events of the previous day circled relentlessly in his mind, each fragment demanding his scrutiny anew. Philippa arrived quietly, her delicate presence almost ethereal in the subdued light. "Lord Peter," she said softly, "I thought you might like to see something." She produced from a folded envelope a small, neatly pressed sheet of paper, a fragment, Whimsy immediately noted, torn from a letter or ledger, inscribed in the same neat hand as the threatening note received days earlier. The message was brief, cryptic. "The truth lies beneath the surface. Dig carefully, or be consumed by the roots." Whimsy took the paper with a thoughtful nod. A poetic admonition, Miss Quain, though no less ominous for its metaphor. The serpent indeed burrows deep. As they examined the paper, Parker entered with the inspector, brisk and businesslike despite the encroaching weariness evident under his eyes. "Lord Peter, we have just received a report from the forensics team in London," Sugg announced. "The analysis of the soil found beneath the rosebush confirms traces of recent disturbance, including a fragment of cloth and faint traces of an unusual powder." "A powder?" Whimsy's interest sharpened immediately. "What kind?" "Charcoal dust, apparently. Often used in the preparation of photographic plates or as a marking agent. Its presence is certainly curious." Whimsy allowed himself a rare smile. "Photography, Miss Quain? Might this relate to that old camera I spotted in the attic?" Philippa nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, my father had an interest in early photography, though it had not been used recently." "Curious indeed," Whimsy mused. "We have here physical evidence of a struggle or secret activity, marked by the unusual powder and the torn cloth beneath the rose bush. But whose fabric is this, and why hide it there?" The conversation turned quickly to the discovery of the missing salver. It had been located, concealed beneath a loose floorboard in the pantry, carefully wrapped in a linen cloth. The salver bore faint scratches, consistent with hurried removal or concealment. The salver, if used to carry tea or documents, may have borne marks of fingerprints or other residue, Sugg noted. "We have dispatched it for analysis." Philippa's face fell. "I cannot imagine why anyone would hide something so ordinary." "Ordinary objects are often the vehicles of extraordinary deceit," Whimsy remarked dryly. Whimsy's mind turned again to the gardener, Withers, whose nervousness had struck a chord with him. Parker had been tasked overnight with discreet inquiries into the gardener's background. "Lord Peter," Parker reported, "Withers has a history not entirely free of suspicion. There are whispers of a past altercation in his previous employ, and some debts that might explain his furtiveness." "And the liaison with the maid?" Whimsy asked. "Confirmed, sir. The maid, a girl named Elsie, has been notably withdrawn and absent-minded of late." Whimsy sat back, steepling his fingers. "Debt, secret romance, mysterious powder, torn cloth, and hidden objects. A complicated weave of human weakness and deception. Sugg, clearly frustrated, leaned forward. It seems everyone has something to hide, yet the pieces refuse to fit neatly. Ah, but the beauty of a puzzle lies in its stubborn resistance, Whimsy said. It is the nature of the investigator to persist where others falter. After a moment's reflection, Whimsy proposed a thorough re-examination of the timeline from the morning of Sir Jocelyn's death, this time focusing on the smallest intervals. Minutes rather than hours. Miss Quain, may I trouble you once more? Whimsy requested. Philippa consented readily, and they worked together to re-chart the sequence, paying close attention to the minor but telling moments. A missed appointment, a delayed footstep, a shadow crossing a window. It became apparent that Mr. Lane, the solicitor who had delivered documents from London, had arrived earlier than initially recorded. His time of arrival overlapped with the unexplained absence of Withers from the greenhouses. Could Lane and Withers have conspired? Sugg wondered aloud. Whimsy's smile was slow and deliberate. It is tempting to assume collusion, Inspector, yet we must first consider whether the timing is genuine or fabricated. To test this, Whimsy proposed a simple experiment. He asked the household staff to replicate the sequence of movements, especially the precise time taken to travel from the greenhouses to the library, including any possible shortcuts or hiding places. The demonstration was revealing. The path was shorter than recorded in the original logs, allowing for unobserved passage in the critical minutes when the murder likely occurred. Such discrepancies in timing, Whimsy remarked, are the cracks through which the truth eventually leaks. At Whimsy's request, Parker then discreetly interviewed Elsie, the maid. Her hands trembled when she spoke, eyes downcast. Miss Elsie, Whimsy said gently, there is no shame in truth. It is often the most difficult burden to bear, but also the most liberating. After a pause, Elsie revealed that she had witnessed a heated argument between Sir Jocelyn and Mr. Lane on the morning of the murder. Words harsh enough to rend the fragile veneer of civility that masked the house. I thought it was just business, she whispered, but then Sir Jocelyn seemed afraid. And when Mr. Lane left, he looked different, angry, threatened. Whimsy exchanged a glance with Sugg. Fear is an emotion with sharp edges, Inspector. It is the motive's silent partner. Next, attention returned to the mysterious letter from Mr. Blakely, which had been unopened until after lunch. Whimsy's suspicion now deepened. What if the letter contained revelations that Sir Jocelyn feared to confront, or disclosed secrets threatening to unravel his carefully maintained facade? Philippa volunteered to bring the letter. As she unfolded the aged paper, Whimsy scanned the carefully penned words. The letter spoke of financial improprieties and hinted at a scandal that would disgrace the family if revealed. It demanded urgent repayment, or the consequences would be ruinous. Blackmail, Whimsy concluded, and a powerful motive to silence. Yet the question remained. Who had sent the letter? Was it truly Blakely, or an impostor seeking to unsettle Sir Jocelyn? Further inquiries revealed that Blakely had been out of the country for several weeks, making an in-person delivery impossible and suggesting that the letter had been sent by proxy. This revelation shifted the investigation's direction toward the inner circle. Someone with access to Sir Jocelyn's correspondence and intimate knowledge of his secrets. Whimsy's thoughts then returned to the stoppered clock, which remained a silent witness. The clock's halting hands suggested an attempt to obscure time, to create a false alibi or mask the exact moment of the crime. Returning to the clock, Whimsy examined its mechanism minutely, noticing that the minute hand had been nudged backward slightly, an action requiring both knowledge and deliberate intent. Manipulation of time to manipulate truth, he mused aloud. The room grew heavy with unspoken implications. At last, a subtle shift occurred in Whimsy's demeanor. His usual ironic detachment gave way to a steely determination. We are nearing the heart of this mystery, where deceit and desperation intertwine. The serpent does not merely hiss, it strikes. He looked around the assembled group. Philippa, eyes wide but resolute. Sugg, wearied but alert. Parker, ever vigilant. The next steps will require patience, precision, and the courage to face uncomfortable truth. I suggest a thorough re-examination of the household's private correspondences and a careful surveillance of those whose stories do not yet withstand scrutiny. As the light faded outside, the silent house of Bracondale Chase seemed to listen, awaiting the moment when shadows would yield their secrets and the truth would emerge, unvarnished and unavoidable. The evening settled with the kind of quiet that presses against the eardrums, the kind that makes one aware of every creak and whisper within the ancient walls of Bracondale Chase. Lord Peter Wimsey, seated by the dying embers in the library, allowed himself a rare moment to indulge in the subtle satisfaction of progress. Yet beneath that calm exterior, his mind was a maelstrom of possibilities and half-formed hypotheses. Philippa, seated opposite, held the letter from Blakely between her fingers as though it were a fragile relic from a vanished world. "Do you truly believe, Peter, that this letter, though unsigned and suspiciously timed, could be the key to the entire mystery?" Whimsy smiled faintly, a gesture of polite condescension rather than mockery. "My dear Philippa, every mystery must have its key, and every key its lock. The question is whether this particular key opens the door we seek or merely a cupboard of dusty irrelevance. So far, it seems to have at least rattled the lock." He tapped the letter thoughtfully. The financial threat contained within these lines may indeed have motivated Sir Jocelyn's torment or his demise, but to place too much weight on it without examining the actors involved would be premature. The inspector entered, his expression as grave as ever. "Lord Peter, we've combed through Mr. Lane's correspondences and accounts. It appears he was acting under considerable pressure. Indeed, several sizable debts, unexplained meetings with creditors, and, more troubling, a recent attempt to secure a substantial loan using questionable collateral." Whimsy inclined his head, the wheels turning visibly behind his sharp eyes. Financial desperation often sharpens the mind in ways less savory than scholarly pursuits. "But there's more," Sugg continued. "Lane's alibi for the morning of the murder remains shaky. Despite his claims of being at the solicitor's office, 2 witnesses place him near the greenhouses around the time Sir Jocelyn was killed." Parker appeared at the door, breathless from his latest errand, and the gardener, Sir Withers, was seen in the vicinity as well. Yet he denies being near the house at that hour, claiming he was tending to the orchard. Whimsy tapped his chin, momentarily distracted by the contrast between the orchard's far-flung location and the shorter route he'd measured earlier. "An inconvenient detail," he murmured. Yet both men's testimonies seemed designed to obfuscate rather than clarify. Philippa folded the letter slowly. "And what of the maid, Elsie?" She seemed terrified, yet hesitant to speak. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. Fear is often the veil that conceals truth. We must unravel it with gentle persistence. As the evening deepened, Whimsy set to work assembling his thoughts. The stolen salver, the tampered clock, the cryptic note, and the conflicting alibis began to converge into a pattern that was as subtle as it was damning. He requested to see the clock once more, carefully examining the mechanism under the soft glow of a shaded lamp. "The minute hand nudged back by precisely 6 minutes, he observed aloud, a deliberate attempt to mislead regarding the time of death. "And yet," he continued, "the testimony of the servants and the timeline of the visitors contradict this adjusted time. If we accept the clock's manipulation as deliberate, then who would benefit from concealing those 6 minutes?" His mind turned immediately to the 2 men with suspicious motives. Lane, struggling under financial burdens and debts, and Withers, the gardener with secrets of his own. Whimsy pondered the nature of their relationship with Sir Jocelyn. The solicitor's desperate attempts to secure loans, combined with his hostile exchanges with the victim, suggested a man driven by more than professional obligation. Meanwhile, Withers' furtiveness and personal debts hinted at a man prone to desperation. Yet neither had a clearly demonstrated opportunity that could withstand scrutiny, until the discovery that the greenhouse's soundproof doors were not as secure as believed. Whimsy arranged for a discreet demonstration, recreating the sound travel from the greenhouses to the library, using both the doors as they were and as they might have been, partially left ajar. The result was telling. Muffled voices could carry sufficiently to be overheard in adjacent rooms, but only under certain precise conditions. Thus, the argument Elsie overheard could have taken place elsewhere, unnoticed by others. Whimsy deduced. Soundproofing is a devilish ally to secrets. With that, Whimsy requested access to the victim's personal diaries and correspondence, hoping to uncover further threads. The diaries revealed a man torn between his public facade and private anxieties, an obsession with hidden debts and a growing paranoia of betrayal. The final entries, hastily written and marked with dark ink, hinted at blackmail but did not name the blackmailer. "It is clear," Whimsy stated, "that Sir Jocelyn believed himself ensnared in a web of deceit, with the noose tightening day by day." Philippa shivered, folding the diary with care. How tragic that his fears may have brought about his downfall. "Indeed," Whimsy agreed, though his tone remained measured. "But tragedy is often the province of detective stories." Returning to the question of the missing salver, Whimsy speculated on its significance. It was not merely a vessel for tea or letters, but a repository, perhaps for incriminating documents or items best hidden from prying eyes. Sugg reported that the cloth found beneath the rose bush had been identified as part of Withers' own jacket, torn during a struggle. "An accident," Philippa suggested uncertainly. "Or a deliberate attempt to implicate," Whimsy replied. "Either way, it places Withers physically at the scene, or at least nearby, at a crucial moment." Whimsy's mind revisited Elsie's testimony. Her reluctance to speak, her evident fear, and the sharpness of her memory for details that others dismissed. These factors suggested she held a key piece of the puzzle. Under gentle questioning, she admitted to seeing Lane leave the greenhouses hurriedly, his expression pale and his clothes slightly disheveled. "Why did you not say this before?" Whimsy asked kindly. "I was scared," Elsie whispered. "I thought if I spoke I might be blamed. I didn't want to cause trouble." The detective's eyes softened momentarily. "The truth has a way of freeing us from fear." The investigation had now narrowed to a scenario. Lane and Withers were both near the scene at the time of the murder. Lane, driven by desperation and anger, and Withers, perhaps unwittingly entangled. Whimsy's final step was to observe the household as a whole during the quiet hours, the interstices of the night when masks slip and secrets surface. He arranged a midnight vigil in the library, accompanied only by Parker and Philippa, the room illuminated by a single flickering candle. The house was otherwise silent, each creak and sigh magnified in the stillness. Suddenly, a faint sound, the subtle click of a door slightly ajar. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "Parker," he whispered, "observe the corridor beyond." They saw Withers emerge from the servants' quarters, glancing furtively over his shoulder before slipping silently towards the study. The detective's intuition piqued. "I think our gardener has a late appointment." Following discreetly, they found Withers opening a hidden compartment behind the large bookcase, a secret space containing documents, letters, and a small pouch of silver coins. Whimsy's smile was slow, predatory. The plot thickens. The papers revealed evidence of blackmail and payments, documents linking Lane and Withers in a tangled conspiracy to extort Sir Jocelyn. Confronted in the morning, Withers faltered, his defenses cracking under Whimsy's relentless calm. "I only wanted to help my family," he muttered, desperation raw in his voice. "Lane dragged me into it. I never meant for it to go so far." Whimsy's voice was measured but firm. Greed and fear are a dangerous alliance. The truth, however, remains unyielding. As Withers was taken away, Whimsy turned to Philippa and the inspector. "The serpent is caught," he declared softly, "though the roots of human weakness often reach deeper than we expect. Bracondale Chase, once a house of polished manners and veiled secrets, had surrendered its dark heart to the logic of detection." Whimsy lit a final cigar, his voice a low murmur. "To the dance of shadows and reason, Miss Quain. May our steps never falter." And with that, the great game was over, until the next riddle whispered on the wind. The morning sun filtered through the mullioned windows of Bracondale Chase's library, casting a pale glow upon the assembled company. Inspector Sugg, Philippa, and the household's remaining servants were gathered with a mixture of expectation and unease, the air thick with the residue of last night's revelations. Lord Peter Whimsy, resplendent in his customary evening coat and silk cravat, stood calmly by the fireplace, a faint smile playing upon his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich with the kind of deliberate precision that commands attention without ostentation, "we have come to the denouement of our little tragedy, a puzzle complex in its construction yet elegant in its solution, much like a well-crafted sonnet, at once intricate and revealing." He paced slowly, his gaze briefly flickering to the somber faces before him. Sir Jocelyn Lane's untimely demise was not the result of supernatural forces, nor the caprice of a villain hitherto unsuspected. Instead, it was the inevitable consequence of a tangled web woven by human frailty, greed, desperation, and fear. Whimsy raised a hand, conjuring the moment's gravity with a scholarly gesture. "The key lies in the altered clock, a seemingly trivial adjustment designed to mislead investigators by 6 minutes. Yet, as we have learned, time, though pliable to human artifice, is ultimately inflexible when confronted with corroborated testimonies and immutable facts." He turned to the inspector. "Mr. Sugg, you recall how the alibis of Mr. Lane and Mr. Withers clashed and crumbled under scrutiny, their movements within the estate unaccounted for in those crucial minutes?" Sugg nodded, eyes sharp with understanding. "Indeed," Whimsy continued, "Mr. Lane's financial difficulties were the catalyst and Mr. Withers' misplaced loyalty the instrument. Together, they conspired to blackmail Sir Jocelyn, a scheme born of desperation but executed with fatal misjudgment." Philippa's eyes widened. "But who dealt the blow, Peter? Who crossed that line from plotting to murder?" Whimsy's smile deepened, touched with a hint of the theatrical. "That, my dear Philippa, was Mr. Withers. Pressured by the escalating demands and fearing exposure, he seized a moment in the greenhouses, a place thought soundproof but revealed through careful experimentation, to betray its secrets. He motioned toward the window. It was here that the struggle ensued, the torn jacket and dropped salver marking the scene. Mr. Withers' attempt to conceal the evidence only further implicated him. With a deft flourish, Whimsy produced the recovered letter and the blackmail documents, now verified by handwriting experts and forensic examination. The letter to Sir Jocelyn, unsigned but unmistakably threatening, was penned by Lane to coerce compliance. The payments hidden in secret compartments were Withers' grim investment in silence. The room was silent but for the slow ticking of the restored clock, a reminder that time, truth, and justice march inexorably forward. Whimsy concluded with characteristic understatement. So, the maid's lack of alibi was a shield of fear rather than guilt, the servants' evasions symptoms of reticence, and the red herrings mere distractions in the grander design. He looked at Withers, now guarded and resigned. The tragedy lies not merely in a death, but in the loss of trust and the corruption of what once was an orderly household. As the police moved to take Withers into custody, Wimsey allowed himself a final wry comment. One finds, time and again, that the darkest mysteries often arise from the most mundane motives: poverty, fear, and the unyielding desire to control one's fate. A reminder that, for all our pretensions, we are all vulnerable to the temptations of desperation. Turning to Philippa, he added with a wink, "And with that, my dear, I believe a certain afternoon tea awaits us, perhaps with fewer disturbances and less mortal peril." The room relaxed, tension easing into quiet reflection. The mystery was laid bare, the house no longer a shadowy labyrinth, but a place where truth, though delayed, had finally emerged. As they departed, Wimsey paused at the door, casting a glance back at the now peaceful study. "To the dance of reason and revelation," he murmured. "May it never cease to captivate us." And with that, the great game was ended, until, inevitably, the next challenge beckoned from the shadows beyond.